Welcome back to another episode of Warren Cali. In this episode, I'm going to detail the crazy story of a Sons of Samoa member. Paul was raised in a two-parent home and was the youngest of 12. His family moved to the United States from Samoa when he was a little boy. As a child, Paul was described as well-behaved and a good child. Paul began getting into trouble with his friends around the age of 14, joining a newly formed gang called Sons of Samoa, or just known as SOS. SOS is a Samoan street gang formed in the 80s after many Samoans came to America and settled in tough areas. They formed gangs to protect themselves. SOS started in Long Beach in the 80s and would become a Crip gang after the influence black gangs gave to Samoans. Paul's family got heavy into the gang lifestyle, and Paul and his brothers became SOS members, and they went full throttle in the streets. One of Paul's brothers was shot and killed in a fight, and another brother was shot at a party and became paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair the rest of his life. But none of this would stop Paul from committing crimes or being in the streets. And on October 6, 1986, at a bar in Long Beach, a small crowd had gathered to watch a Monday night football game. Paul and another man entered the bar, and several eyewitnesses noticed that Paul was carrying a rifle. Paul and his partner approached the bartender, who was standing at the cash register with his back towards the room. The bartender heard someone shout, and he turned around. Paul pointed the rifle in his face and demanded everything in the register. The bartender pulled out the cash and set the cash on the counter. Paul and his partner stuffed the money into their pockets and walked away. Paul and his partner split up and began robbing people at the bar. They robbed people for their money and whatever belongings they had. Paul's partner would encounter twin brothers, Melvin and Calvin. Melvin began beating up Paul's partner and knocked him to the ground. Paul walked towards the fight and shot Melvin in the neck. Paul then swung the rifle in Calvin's direction and Calvin dropped to the floor. He tried to hide, but was shot by Paul in the chest. Paul then turned the rifle in the direction of a man named Bruce, and also Bruce's wife. Bruce jumped in front of his wife and was shot. The bartender would say that Paul's partner fired shots as well. Before exiting the bar, Paul aimed a gun at the bartender, smiled, and shot him in the neck. From this shooting, Melvin died at the scene. The other three gunshot victims, Calvin, Bruce, and the bartender, they all survived. Paul would later be picked up for this crime and charged with a long list of charges, from robbery, murder, gun possession, attempted murder, and several more. 8 eyewitnesses from the bar identified Paul and all testified at his trial, but everyone's testimony was a little bit different, with many being drunk at the bar and a lot of time passing by with this case. At his trial, many things will be brought up to show Paul's destructive life. His youth authority record will be brought up. He was released from youth authority in 1986, right before he committed this crazy crime in the same year. In youth authority, Paul was known to fight, be a part of riots, carry weapons, and make threats against the staff and also other inmates. With so much against Paul, at trial, he would be sentenced to death. In 2000, Paul, who was on death row, along with notorious Rolling 60 Crip Little Fee, who was also on death row, and a few others nearly escaped San Quentin State Prison. They tried to escape and take hostages, but they were later rearrested shortly after attempted escape. Paul has been in prison for over 30 years and is now 59 years old. Even though he was sentenced to death, a new California law has stopped all executions. So Paul will spend the rest of his life in prison and will never be released. This will conclude this episode. If you haven't already, check out my previous episodes. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.